proceeding, time comes for God to hire.
We'll give you new break after that. Thank you.
Please, Court, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Madam Court Order, solicitors, to our jury, good morning. Before I respond to the state's presentation, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome all 15 of you, including our alternates, to the ranks of the 3%. It's just 3% of people that have put their lives on hold and actually served as jurors in a criminal case. Just 3% have done what you're doing to ensure that this thing we have, this thing we were born with, this kind of protection that we have, simply because of where we had the benefit to be born, this presumption of innocence hasn't faded away with instant media, social media, where somebody, anybody, can say anything, and it gets spread and it gets shared, and nobody asks, where's the proof? Is it true? By being here today, you show us that proof, and that proof beyond a reasonable doubt, still matter. Not just for my client, but for you and for me, and for all these folks out here in the audience. So both as a co-counsel in this case, and as a citizen, I want to thank you for being here and for being part of the 3%. See, we've asked you to serve because if there was ever a case that demanded to be heard inside a court of law by an impartial jury, it would be this one. You see, up until now, this case has largely been heard outside of these walls, out there in the public. And it's gathered a lot of noise around it. Misinformation, half-truths, conspiracy theories. And the problem is, after 2,093 days, the noise gets so loud and it gets repeated so often that we think we know the story of this case. But you all had that thankless job of listening to the evidence come from that witness stand and separating the fact from the fiction, the evidence from the innuendo, and most importantly, the proof from the speculation. And it's an important job, because a fellow citizen has put his life, released his freedom, in your hands. My client, Mr. Sidney Moore, who, folks, I have the utter privilege to be here today to represent. The man sits here in the shadow of the penitentiary, knowing that the state of South Carolina and the solicitor's office and Horry County government has spent 2,093 days, resources, effort, time, effort, and energy to ensure a conviction in this case. And folks, faced with those odds, a lot of people, maybe most people, would say, you know what, I don't stand a chance on that. There's no way. That's a large reason why we don't have a lot of jury trials. But Sidney Moore says, give me 12 total strangers and give them the final authority on my fate, because, folks, we know if it's 12 impartial strangers that fulfill their obligation to just listen to the evidence with an open mind and apply the law that the judge gives you at the end of this case, including the presumption of innocence and the burden of proof, we know what that outcome is going to be. You're going to see that Sidney Moore did not abduct, kidnap, or harm Heather Elvis, and folks, he doesn't know who did. You're going to see that he had no motive to wish any harm on Miss Elvis, and he didn't have the means to abduct her or make her disappear without leaving any trace of physical evidence whatsoever. Moreover, you're going to see that the decision to charge Sidney and the investigation that led to that decision was rushed, and it was rushed because they were reacting to the noise. Let's take a moment here and let's talk about what the evidence is going to show. I want to take us back to the summer of 2013, June of 2013. This time, Sidney is a married father of 3. He earns his living as a self-employed contractor, and what he does, he kind of has this niche where he works primarily for restaurants. He goes in after hours and does usually relatively small repair jobs, renovation work before they open up for the next shift. And he does it for a number of different restaurants in the area, and that's how he makes his living. And his wife is a freelance travel agent. She works from home, and that allows her to homeschool their 3 kids there at the house in Socastee. And they live on this parcel that they share with her parents, so Sidney's in-laws. They've got, local child care and everything, so in a lot of ways, Sidney kind of has everything going for him. But like a lot of us, like a lot of families, just people in general, there was some trouble just below the surface. He and his wife were in a bad place. They had talked about separation, divorce. They got to the point where they had to decide, do we wait till the kids get older? Do we do it now? Do we separate? A lot of people have had to have these conversations. So they are in this sort of marital limbo back during this time. And it's in this context that he meets Heather Ellis, an outgoing and funny hostess there at one of the restaurants he was doing work at. And you'll hear that Miss Elvis finds Sidney attractive, initiates some conversation, and they engage in a relationship. This is an affair. It's never been denied. And it's easy to understand because everybody we've talked to and all the evidence we've seen says that Miss Elvis is always with a smile on her face, laughter in her voice, and we're going to see that her life was a lot different than Sidney's. He's a father of 3, he's married, he's got that set of routines, he's in his, mid-30s at that point. And Miss Elvis's life is kind of chaotic. What we mean by that is pretty much throughout the entire year of 2013, we're going to see that either it be the problems at home or whatever the case may be, she goes from living in her car to friends' couches, back to her car, back to friends' couches, living with other boyfriends who we'll talk about in a moment. But in any event, that's the circumstances under which they meet, and this relationship goes on for a couple of months. Hit our next slide, Ryan. And that'll take us to early November of 2013. In early November of 2013, late October, this is the time period where the state spent most of their time in opening statements. You'll hear that Sidney's wife found out about the affair, and she said some things, she texted some things that I'm sure she'd probably like to have back, but she found out. And what's most interesting, though, is not what happens in early November 2013, but what happens in the time period from early November 2013 until the night Heather Ellis goes missing on December 17th of 2013. Next slide. You want to know what it is? You want to know what's going on during this time period where these people were obsessed, stewing over this girl? Nothing. Nothing. The communications that you're going to hear regarding Miss Elvis are limited to the ones that were referenced in their opening statement. It's a handful at that time of the breakup. Neither Sidney nor his wife make any scene at work, no threats, nothing of that nature. There's no communications in any way, shape, or form regarding pregnancy that comes up during this time. We're going to be bombarded with all kind of communications and emails and text and cell tower data. All kind of experts are going to take the stand, but out of all those experts and all those communications, nobody's going to come in here and say, listen, on such and such date, Miss Elvis said, hey, Sidney, I might be pregnant. I need to talk to you. There simply is no motive because nothing happens during this time period. What you'll see is that after his wife finds out about his affair, Sidney and his wife and his whole family go on this, I think it's about a 4-week kind of cross-country vacation. They go down to Florida, down through the Gulf, and over to Disney in California. And this will be verified by the GPS data that's in his truck. That's right, there'll be GPS data from his truck. And that's what's going on. This is a family that's not, if they're obsessed with anything, they're obsessed with redevoting themselves to their marriage. They're obsessed with how they're going to get the kids through school, how they're going to pay for health insurance. That's what the evidence is going to show about this time period. And on December 17th, the early morning hours of December 18th, when Miss Elvis goes missing, the next critical point is what happens from there to the end of December. You're going to hear that when she goes missing, Sidney voluntarily comes in, gives multiple statements, Didn't have to do that. His wife gives statements, and we'll see that he's pretty much instantly a suspect because of this affair, which again, he never denied, nobody ever denied, everybody knew about it. But the police develop a sort of tunnel vision early on. And so we'll see that by end of December, maybe early January, search warrants have been executed on his home, on his vehicle, the F-150 that we'll hear so much about. We'll hear that all these electronics in his house have been seized and searched by all kinds of experts. And so that doesn't turn up anything incriminating. So he's arrested in February of 2014, about 2 months later. So what is the smoking gun? What is uncovered that says, you know what, we need to close this investigation at this point because we got our guy? Do they uncover anything incriminating from his cell phone data? No. The cell phone data is what we'll call the ping data. That puts him at his house during the time Heather Ellis went missing. So that's not incriminating. Do they uncover blood or DNA from his vehicle or anything, any hair strands, fingerprints, anything from his F-150 relating to Miss Ellis? No. Does a witness come forward all of a sudden and say, hey, I saw something, I saw that guy? No, there's no witnesses. We'll hear that they can't, that this video we keep hearing about, they can't identify that to be Sidney's truck or anybody else's truck. So what is going on in this time period that convinces law enforcement at this early stage? Again, this is 2,093 days ago. And they effectively closed the book within about 2 months. What was it that forced them to make that decision then? We're going to hear that that's when the noise started to happen. We're going to hear national, state media, and how they are getting constant attention, pressure from all over the place. And it's understandable because, folks, police are like everybody else, right? They want to get justice for the family. They want to make a community feel safe. They want to be able to say, we got somebody. And I submit to you that what we're going to see is that in doing so, with those influences, they rushed. They didn't ask the questions that you and I are going to ask during the course of this trial. What we're going to see is that once they decided to get a warrant, and we'll hear about something called a probable cause warrant, because you don't have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt to have an arrest of somebody or an arrest warrant. You only need probable cause, something much lower. And I submit to you that what we're going to see is that in getting that arrest warrant, they hope that maybe something else would come up over time. But the problem with that, doing it that way is something we call confirmation bias. And this is something that police officers are often trained about to be wary of. And Brian, if we'll hit our next slide. Confirmation bias deals with when you've kind of already made a decision in your mind, you start viewing things in that context to prove that decision that you've already come to. And there's a definition here from a police trade magazine. So I submit to you what we're going to see is a lot of this confirmation bias coming forward throughout the course of this case. And we'll just give you a couple examples. Going back to our timeline here, there's going to be some other men in her life that prosecution didn't talk to you about. We're going to hear about a man named Jeremy Fleming, who is apparently an abusive boyfriend, and they move in together in September of 2013, which would be during the time period where she's in this relationship with Sidney, and she only moves out with him on December 2nd, less than a couple weeks before her disappearance, in sort of a blow-up that occurs. And then there's also men like Jerry Stevens. We're going to hear that she's in a flirtatious communication with him on December 16th, saying, you know, I'm coming over tomorrow night, the night of December 17th, early 18th, the night she goes missing. And we're going to see the difference between what time, effort, and energy was spent into investigating, looking at, examining those individuals versus Sidney. And I think we'll see that confirmation bias plays a big role in how this case goes forward. Go on, next slide. And I think there's probably not going to be a better example of this idea of making up your mind or rushing too early than the testimony of this man, Grant Fredericks. And Grant Fredericks is a nice guy. He's a smart guy. He's sort of a professional witness of sorts, but he is a former broadcaster and a TV man turned law enforcement agent. And he kind of has this, he's certified in this field of science known as forensic video analysis. And what that means, generally speaking, is, for example, if you have a convenience store video camera and you see somebody on the video camera, different measurements and different techniques may help you to determine, well, is the person 6 feet tall or 5'4"? You can gather different information based on the video in these different measurements. And we won't have any dispute about his ability to do those things and that this is a legitimate science. But a couple of things you need to know. When he was hired, when is this testimony that he's given that is so important, that's so critical to this case? He wasn't brought in until 2013 when he was hired by the solicitor's office. And what's more important is we're going to hear the conclusions he reaches. They've not been substantiated by anybody in his field or any other field. He's coming to tell you that he can look at the headlight spread pattern, and he will tell you that the various headlights of all these different automobiles that come out by the thousands on assembly lines have such a unique spread pattern that he can tell you if it's that vehicle versus that vehicle, that essentially the headlight shine is as unique as a human fingerprint. And folks, there's no scientific evidence to substantiate that. He will not be able to point to any scientific evidence to substantiate that. He is the only person, to our knowledge, that has ever testified to that being the case. So I'm going to ask at the end of the case, and I may ask you at this point, that we can go ahead and disregard Grant Fredericks' conclusions and his testimony. And so at the end of the case, we're going to look at a situation where Sidney's cell phone data puts him at his house during the time Miss Elvis goes missing. There is none of her DNA in his truck, no blood, none of his DNA in her car, at the landing, anywhere else. There is nobody saying or showing that he was anywhere near Peachtree Landing on the night she went missing. So how does the state intend to prove this case? Well, we're going to rely on something called circumstantial evidence. And my good friend Chris Helms gave us a great example about the fish and the fishermen. But the problem with using circumstantial evidence and drawing these inferences that we've heard about is that sometimes we draw these inferences whenever maybe we've already made up that conclusion in our mind. Or maybe we've got a conclusion we really want to be able to reach. I'll give you this example. I submit to you that every one of us, as members of this community, deep down, maybe not even so deep down, we want to be able to convict Sidney of this crime. That's an odd thing for his lawyer to say. But I think it's true, because if we can convict somebody, if we can convict anybody, then we can give this family closure. We can feel safer as a community. We don't feel helpless. But we got to be wary of that. Because folks, we can't give justice to Heather Elvis by giving an injustice to another citizen like Sidney Moore. We always have to be careful of circumstantial evidence. I want to talk to you briefly about the presumptions in this case. You know, often we deal with the presumption of guilt. That's how a lot of us operate. We're sitting at home and the nightly news comes on and there's somebody that's been charged with some crime. We don't intuitively sit there and say, well, I wonder how reliable the eyewitnesses are. I wonder how sound the evidence is or the science is that resulted in this person being charged. We don't generally do that. We just wonder how much time he's going to get, how long they're going to lock him away. And we all do that. And there's people in our lives that history has shown us that these people are not to be trusted. You know, they're no good, their family's no good. We all know people like that. that if we hear about something that they've done or been alleged to have done, we say, that sounds like them. So do we ever act with the presumption of innocence in our daily life? Of course we do. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I get a knock on my door, and it's a young man, maybe, I don't know, 11 or 12 at the time, and he does landscaping jobs. He has a little landscaping business in the neighborhood. And when he shows up, he's got a trailer with all his equipment on it, but he's too young to have a driver's license, so he's got one of those souped-up golf carts that he drives it all around the neighborhood and does all his landscaping jobs. And I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, and you know, as you can probably tell, I think the world of him, and probably talk to him like people talk about their kids or grandkids. You know, he's going to be president and a billionaire and cure cancer, you know, everything, all at the same time. And so if somebody came to me and they said, you know what, kid down the street, he's been accused of some crime, robbing a bank, or maybe not even something that bad, maybe bouncing checks, what would my reaction be? That can't be right. There must be some mistake. And you've got people in your life that you would have that same reaction to. That's what it means when you're acting with the presumption of innocence. And if somebody came to me and said, you know, I've got circumstantial evidence that kid down the street robbed a bank, bounced checks, well, you'd have to prove that to me and show to the exclusion of all other possibilities. And you'd have to show to me that they examined and evaluated all other possibilities before I condemned him to the custody of the state. And if those questions and that evidence raised questions or other possibilities, the state would have to answer each and every one of those questions to my satisfaction, not one of them, or two of them, or most of them, or a lot of them, but all of them. As you sit here today, folks, I submit to you that your oath, you don't know Sidney Moore. You've not heard any evidence in this case, but as you sit here, your obligation, if we're truly working with the presumption of innocence, is to say, Mr. Solicitor, that can't be right. There must be some mistake, and you're going to have to prove it to us. That's what the presumption of innocence means. And folks, you've got a tough job. You know, myself and Mr. Galmore, that's representing Sidney, we have a difficult job in trying to defend somebody in a court of a crime that's a terrible crime. And my colleagues here for the prosecution, they have a difficult job in presenting their case and trying to meet their burden of proof. Judge Dennis has a difficult job trying to referee us and try to ensure he instructs you correctly on the law. But ultimately, we can go, and when this case is over, we've done our best because we don't have to make the hard decisions. That's reserved to you. You all have to do that at the end of this case. And I know that it'll be a heavy burden on you, like rocks on your shoulders to know whether or not you did the right thing. So I tell you what, I'll make you this deal. I'll ask for something from you. In exchange, I'll give you. I just ask that you operate from now to the end of this trial with that presumption of innocence and listen attentively to the evidence that's being presented. And at the end of the trial, apply the law that the judge gives you. And folks, if you do that, if you just give us that, I can give you the peace of mind to know that years from now, you won't have to wake up and wonder whether or not there's an innocent man sitting in jail that shouldn't be. Because I'm going to give you a chance during this trial, at the end of this case, to send an innocent man home. Thank you for your time.